Thank you very much, Chair. In terms of the financial implications, the government has promised local authorities, and I quote, local authorities will receive additional resource to meet any new net costs arising from the policy set out in the strategy and consultations when implemented. This includes both upfront transition costs and ongoing operational costs. So why then, Mayor Glanville, are councils concerned that they will not have sufficient funding to implement the strategy?
I think there's very broad principles set out as you have, but the devil is in the detail. We've just had an extensive debate on everything from incineration to food waste to some of the challenges of deposit schemes and the producer pays principles. All of that complexity is still to be borne out in how things will be implemented. We've, I think, raised concerns as an ALGA around some of the impact assessments and how the averages used by RAP have kind of been played out. We think that before we sort of jump for some of those policies and understand their financial implications, we want to go into much more detail with the government. I think if that principle gets through the devil in the detail, that would be welcome. But I think that the challenge for us is there's still too much uncertainty there going into the system, and also then how funding may be passed on. You know, we heard a discussion earlier about ring fencing. The real challenges for local government, obviously the background of austerity, the fair funding review, the spending review to come. How will those inputs go into a system with these increased burdens, and recognising some local councils have obviously also invested extensively already. Other local authorities are looking at how they might extend things like food recycling. So there's not an easy baseline to understand where that additional resources going into local government will land.
District Councils Network. Are you happy? And
no,
if not, why are you not happy?
I mean, we have zero confidence in the fact that the funding will follow the new function. And you know, this is borne out through history. This committee will have seen multiple examples where government has passed responsibilities or changed the role of local government and talked about funding coming, but it hasn't come. And this is an incredibly complex area. I mean, we'll talk later, I'm sure, about some of the elements within this strategy, but it's quite clear that the Treasury hasn't even had a cursory glance at how much this strategy is going to cost, because if they had, I very much doubt we would be sat around discussing it today. If we just talk about things such as vehicle replacement going forward, of new vehicles that we don't currently have. You know, these vehicles are between £150,000 and £250,000 per vehicle, with most councils having multiple vehicles. If we start just pushing that across the 200 district councils in this country, you start to get into an idea of the ongoing costs of this scheme. If we talk about the fact that within this strategy, they talk about every council and every resident having the same colour and size of bin. Well, you know, just think about trying to put that across the country, let alone when we start talking about things such as green waste, much of which is charged for at the moment but will now be free during the growing season, as yet undefined within the strategy. Can you imagine every council going out to try and procure staff, machinery and resources to collect green waste for free during an undefined growing season, all at the same time? All of these costs, none of them set out in this paper. So it's quite clear that is an area where work still has to be done. And I think local government would absolutely hold firm that they would not take on these new responsibilities unless there was significant money put in place, not just for the transition, but for the future. And you will know, tying future governments to ongoing funding for something is impossible.
Okay, well, it's great to hear that you're such a great fan of this. So I'm assuming that your thoughts on the government's impact assessment, about whether that actually accurately estimates the cost to local authorities, I'm assuming that you're not going to be in agreement with that impact assessment either then?
Well, we don't know the factors that were put into the impact assessment. It was clear that the ministry weren't really aware of the work that was going on in the department. So, we, as a major part of this whole policy, were clearly blindsided as the ministry were on it, which means that we had no opportunity to take part in the impact assessments. We don't know what's included and what's not included. And until we do, then frankly, they're not really worth the paper they're written on.
Well, just coming back on that, the government did say that its third option, which is the multi-stream dry recycling, in terms of within its impact assessment, it said that that will generate a saving of £679 million a year for local authorities. Aren't you in agreement with that?
Well, we don't know what's included within the impact assessments, and until we have all of the technical work that's done, I'm afraid that figure just sounds like a figure that has been plucked out of thin air. And of course, that may be the true figure, that may be the saving figure, but unless you know how much the cost figure is on the other side of it, then frankly, 600 and whatever million pounds sounds amazing. If it costs £3 billion to do, then it isn't amazing.
I think there's a question about the infrastructure you would need to roll out that sort of model. There's the cost of collection, and then there's the gate fees that you might get both on the sort of landfill side and on the market for recycling. So all of that, I think, is as uncertain as Councillor Fleming has said.
I think the other bit that I would say is all the evidence shows that residents' participation is key. Yeah. The simpler the scheme is, the higher the participation level. This seems to be based on every single person obeying all the rules all of the time.
Okay, well, in terms of the most of the additional funding, that is actually expected to be coming from the new extended producer responsibility scheme. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Do you expect that to be a reliable, long-term source of funding for local authorities? And should funding for the EPR be ring-fenced to ensure that it is only spent on recycling and waste management services? Mayor Glanville.
I think we heard some of the challenges from the previous evidence session around this isn't a source of funding that local government has had access to up to now. There are some perverse incentives depending on how the producer pays principle is applied. If it means that the recycling streams sort of alter in terms of quality of plastics, all of that, it can be a very uncertain, and actually the better we do potentially, the less money that could be available. I think it's a long-term stable funding that we would want to see. And there's obviously historic challenges around ring fencing and the whims of future governments. I think there's also that sense that depending on how the producer pays principle is rolled out, and whether we're also talking about whether those, if it's recycled, obviously we may understand where that product has ended up. But if it's in the residual waste stream, are we also being paid for that? And then more broadly, the public affairs and awareness work that we need to do to explain these systems and get resident buy-in. I think we'd need to make sure that it was funding fully the rollout of these schemes and not just certain types of products entering the waste stream, because sweeping is costly, and some of the long-term investments that we have to make.
Okay, and Councillor, what are your views on EPR?
But also, there is a fundamental problem, which of course is that we are in the middle of the process. Both the collection and disposal authorities are in the right bang in the middle of this process. At the other end of the process is the market, and the market for recyclables is incredibly volatile. When I first became a councillor, there was a huge market for recycled glass. Then there wasn't a market for recycled glass. Then some coloured glass had a market and other coloured glass didn't have a market. And now we're in a position where actually it costs to take glass away. Now, frankly, you cannot have a model that is based on those variables. It just doesn't work and doesn't stack up and won't stack up going into the future.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure the Chancellor will be very happy to read today's notes from the meeting.